Hello, everyone. I'm Achilleas. I work at Celestia, and I'll try not to be too provocative with the talk today, but the first half of it will be focused around sort of problematizing the NFT as the primitive for creativity, and the second half will be some sort of imagination around what I believe might be a less constraining medium for digital artists to explore. So let's start by kind of like doing a quick retrospective on this cursed word, NFT, which I think has divided, people who initially saw it as the most promising sort of renaissance of new art, and then eventually it was relegated in the minds of many normal people as a sort of, primitive of scams of sorts. Why did this happen, and sort of where can we trace the promise? I'll start quite early on, which is 90 years ago, in this paper by Walter Benjamin called The Work of Art in the Age of Mechanical Reproduction. In this paper, Benjamin explores the consequences of photography in traditional art. And the idea is that, in traditional art, you have this notion of aura. The aura is the emergent property of something that's uniquely located somewhere, spatially and temporally. A thing is sacred basically when it has a presence in a gravitational pull. You can think of the role of artifacts in, religious ceremonies, or the role of traditional paintings in galleries. For Benjamin, the sort of locatedness of something brings people together in a very unique manner. So the idea is a mechanical reproduction, like photography, the sort of industrial reproduction of visuals that happen in the mid-20th century diminishes the aura because the visual becomes fully replicatable across many, many media, right? So you have, a Manet painting here, which was one of Benjamin's favorite artists, which is no longer unique in some respects, right? Like it's right there. You can Google it on your phone. It's also in the gallery. So the sense of, there's a diminishment of the sort of uniqueness of it as a Schelling point or as a coordinating sort of mediator for people to gravitate around. Some people said that NFTs can bring back the aura in a way, right? Because they bring back this uniqueness and objecthood. An NFT is unique in some ways. It's located on a chain somewhere, but everyone can agree and point to the same exact thing. So there was like this kind of conversation early on in 2020 where a lot of people said that maybe we can have a return to uniqueness, scarcity, and therefore sort of the emergent sacred properties of these artifacts. But we end up with something like that, which is pictures with hats and metadata. And I am just not convinced that this holds the promise of what digital art and specifically cryptographic networks that can enable a ton of things. We haven't sort of fully explored how we can return to the aura and the sort of sacredness of objects with cryptographic networks. What is the reason why I think this is not enough? Art has lost its ritualistic basis. So for Benjamin, a big reason why artifacts and artworks have this sacred sort of emergent properties because the unique value of authentic works has its basis in ritual, the location of its original value. So a ritual basically is like a communal practice that sort of converges around some sort of object that uses this object as a mediator for communion, right? And with mechanical reproduction, for Benjamin, cult value becomes exhibition value. There's no more sort of use of the artifact as mediator for communion. And therefore, it becomes purely a vehicle for sort of speculation, or in some ways, like a kind of like it loses its fundamental properties as something that people can gather around, essentially. I think the reason why the NFT is a reductionist construction is because it's unable to contain within it the ritualistic value that Benjamin is talking about, right? It cannot mediate for various things because it lacks some properties. The properties that I think it lacks are ontology, topology, and ritual. So like, the objecthood of something, where is it located, and what can emerge from it, or what can lend itself to. And I feel like these three things together can kind of be better expressed through what I call Artchains, which are sort of, I will go through later. But first we can go through these three sort of components and relate them to the way digital art is happening today. So ontology is pretty straightforward, right? Talking about digital objects that are persistent, that are unique, that are ownable, have provenance, and are programmable. Examples of that are, in the real world, like a painting, right, has all of these features. A performance, for example, is located somewhere. An NFT is also sort of, has an ontological sort of basis to it. But all of these things are happening in abstraction, right? Like it's an object somewhere abstractly. So what happens there is that the object is unable to lend itself to community because it's like sort of, doesn't have any contextual basis around it. So it's, I'm able to confer meaning, right? Like, and you kind of saw that with some of these PFP communities, where over time, people lost interest because the sort of, all they could gather around was some object that didn't have any contextual relation to anything else. So maybe that means that they can be sort of purely speculative vehicles. I think in some ways, there are better speculative vehicles when it comes to just to sort of speculation than sort of these PFPs are, because fungible tokens, I think, might be strictly better as primitives specifically for attention prediction markets, right? Like, fungible tokens are faster to move and create. They're simpler in some ways, just a ticker and an image, it's easier for you to grok, and they're infinitely elastic, right? Like, you've seen the pump fund charts sort of, getting born and die within microseconds. And this is a quote from Marx, that all that is solid melts into air. Like, slowly, the non-fungible becomes increasingly more fungible. So, there's no sort of surprise, basically, that a lot of the air that was occupied by NFTs over the last few years have been sucked off by these meme coins, which are just like much better at predicting where your attention is and therefore carrying capital with them. So what is the second component that I think is missing, and maybe it can sort of help bring back this ritualistic basis? It's topology. An object gets meaning. An object is meaningful because of its context. Meaningful objects are autonomous and conversant with a wider reality. In digital spaces, they can do so in persistent spaces with enshrined rule sets, and they become relational. An example is, the sort of famous Duchamp toilet. In a gallery, it's an artwork. In a toilet, it's a toilet, right? It's a urinal. It's nothing more than that. But if it's placed in the gallery, it creates a sort of contextual relation to other things around it, the people looking at it, contemplate it in some way, etc. Other examples of sort of topological properties are, things like ZKTLS, where you can get some proof from what you did in the real world, you put it on the chain, it creates some, relation to, where you were, what you did, what other people did, etc. Achievements in video games are interesting sort of locatedness, the create against spaces, where it's like, I have the achievement because I did something. I cannot replicate if I didn't do that thing. And things like POAPs, right? You were at an event, etc. So all of these objects are located in some context map with other objects, and therefore maybe they have a better sort of way of gathering and being meaning makers. So how is the meaning sort of format, I think, doesn't work extremely well with NFTs. Not necessarily, again, I don't want to be too provocative, but in a reductionist way. The sort of meaning landscape for sort of a PFP, right, is like you have money, that means you get a rare PFP that only relates to like other PFPs that are less rare than itself, right? So like the meaning relation is very, very narrow. It's like this is the rarest thing from all the other stuff. But the whole sort of collection doesn't really relate to anything else intrinsically or contextually. So it's hard to create intrinsic meaning from something like that. Video games are kind of better at being meaning creators because you can have a reputation, like you're really good at the game, right? It means you get an achievement badge which relates to other achievements that other people did, other gamers sort of took place. So there's like slowly you have this creation of a map of meanings in some ways, right? Like there's there's like relationality between all these different things. And therefore the gamer says I have an achievement, it means something more than just, I bought it. It means I did something, I related to the game in some way, I have some sort of, I sacrificed my time for it, etc. And similarly, in the traditional art world, maybe the way that the raw materials are crafted in an artifact that it's conversing with historical and formal context, locate a traditional art object in the space of history or art history, and therefore can sort of confer some meaning as well. The third component is ritual, which is a communal process in some rule space with non-deterministic interactive outcomes. Sacrifice is inherent in value creation in this case, right? Like you have to sacrifice something to get something else out. And there's a long-term, this is too wordy maybe, dialectical architecting of the meaning landscape. There's a conversation between like the sacred and the mortal, right? Like you can think about sort of the way burn mechanics work, where you have to burn an NFT to get something else. And if you get this other thing, you showcase that you were willing to sacrifice this first thing. So there's like a creation of some sort of gamified mechanic there that's in some ways ritualistic. A raid in an MMORPG, if everyone gathers together, they go sort of to beat the big boss and they get some loot from it, that loot carries within it the ritualistic meaning of the fact that everyone gathered to defeat the big boss. And therefore it has some more value than like it's a lot of damage. It's saying, look, I participate in some activity with all my friends and we got this out of it. General mints have the same thing. Like you sort of take the entropy hash of a block, and it creates, an artwork from it, and then there's a relation between the sort of moment in time and the resulting artwork. And the mass, in the church, similarly, everyone confers around some sort of sacred object, and there's like a intrinsic meaning making in that sort of process. This is like a very weird slide, but basically what I'm trying to say is that the thing in the middle is the thing that I think is really interesting about digital art. And we don't really have the right kind of primitive right now to express this sort of relationality, this like complex relationality in digital spaces. We only have an object, and the object by itself is not sufficient to do so. So I want to sort of talk a bit about the notion of an art chain, which is a bespoke, persistent virtual machine that's presented as an artwork. What does this mean in like simple English? It means like that the artwork is the chain. There's not the object on the chain. The artwork itself is the chain itself in a way. They can be highly customizable, which allows for like internal, non-deterministic communal performance art pieces, have enshrined rules that allow for emergent coordination. And there's sort of the artist like deploys it out there, and then like things happen to it that they couldn't even predict in the beginning. For me, that's like a similar leap from like when we started with shared contracts in early 2020, where the only way for you to deploy an NFT was to like add token ID to an open shared contract, and you put some pictures on it, like that was the sort of result of it. Then Manifold came along, and they were like, you can deploy your own contract as an artist. You can create your own burn mechanics. You create your own distribution ideas. It's like, it's your thing, it's your canvas. And people were like, well, this is really cool. I can do more than just an image, basically. I think similarly, going all the way to saying you can deploy your own block space with all of the nuance that carries is similarly sort of, I think, allows for the emergence of all of these cool properties like topologies, ritual, etc. An example of this, you can have a chain that like emits objects every 60 years. And if you're not there when it's emitted, you don't get the object, for example. You have like a communal unlocking of artifacts and interactions. Like people have to do something together in that block space, and then something emerges, that something pops up that you can grab. And then that's something you only could have gotten if you did the things that you did. And then you can also sacrifice sort of capital for ritualistic purposes, right? Like you can burn something, you can give money to the thing, and then things come out within this sort of like wider rule set. And this kind of reminds me of like this slide from Stephen Willets, which is like, what is an artwork, right? Now, an artwork basically is, it's the mediator of relating between an artist and the audience, right? Like it acts as like this sort of, filter through which an artist relates to its audience fundamentally, right? So I'm saying that like, if we replace the artwork there with like a chain, some interesting things might happen. So what I've been saying is don't conflate the artwork with the NFT. The NFT can be an interesting vessel for artworks, but there are more, there's other vessels that have been underexplored for digital artworks. The digital objects are only meaningful insofar as they're vessels of or emergent properties of artworks. Let's move the primitive to the bespoke virtual machine as the canvas with other primitives art supply. And that's also a playground for communal world making. One of the silver linings for Benjamin about the death of the aura was that like art creation becomes communal. Like everyone can participate. It's not just the artist and the gallery, in some sort of like ivory tower. It becomes much more sort of open for anyone to be a part of this meaning making. I think that is the thing we're seeing emerge with digital art. So in a way, what I'm saying is like we've confused the artwork as the table in this image, right? Like there's an object and we're selling it and we're trading it. Well, Abramovich there, who I'm not a big fan of, but this is an interesting sort of image. Like the artwork is the interaction of Abramovich with the audience using the table as a mediator, right? So let's zoom out from the table, take the whole thing in. What kind of primitives can we use to do that? Rather than starting from the NFT as the primitive that is a scaffolding for community, fundamentally a financially motivated exercise, we should start with community, we should start with the scaffolding, the sort of topology in the space around which object can emerge, and then from there, interesting objects will emerge that carry with a meaning, financial value, and sort of ritualistic anchoring. What's interesting about this as well is in some ways I feel like the sort of the Artchain concept I'm describing, which is imbuing art, digital art with ontology, topology, and ritual, is very similar to what game developers in crypto are doing, where they're imbuing games with persistent autonomy and expressivity. So an autonomous world is very similar to an art chain in the sense that they're both communal playgrounds for meaning making, except in the one case, it's the artist who's deploying it, so they're doing it in an artistic way. The other, in their case, is a game dev who's deploying it. And the plumbing is the blockchain, but then once you cross that threshold, the plumbing becomes world making in a way. Like all the token transfers and the interactions, the transactions become sort of focal points for interaction between audience and participant. Now, we've been sort of thinking about it a lot at Celestia, and there's like, here's just an example of like what an Artchain could look like, which is kind of cool. So, you can basically deploy an arbitrary program with a light node that writes on the Celestia block space or any DA block space and also reads from it. And then maybe tokens emerge sort of optionally in that framework. You don't have to have tokens, but you could. And so what you have here is the three components I was sort of described. You have the ritual, which is like the reading and the writing of data. Like there's like things are happening, things are changing, then you read that and you change the state of the chain, and like this sort of process goes cyclically. From there, which a space emerges, which is the blockchain itself, like the Artchain, is like the thing that contains the objects and the meaning making of the rituals. And from there, which like ontology might sort of emerge, like this object, these tokens, I'm saying are much more meaningful when they're located in an intentional space for world making, rather than if they're abstractly in some random block space that's like, immediately indexes things on OpenSea and they become sort of trading vehicles by definition. So, I'm saying it might be interesting to like invert the process, start from ritual topology, start from the chain as a primitive, get the objects out there. We're working on a few of these experiments with some really cool artists. If you're an artist and this excites you or confuses you or you find it very sort of weird and annoying, then come talk to me after. We really want to see if this is interesting and exciting, and would love to see more people experiment with the tools that are out there that I think are sort of maybe, at this stage sort of only play tools for like engineers and crypto fanatics, but maybe there's like things that people who are more artistically inclined can do that we haven't really experienced yet. That's it. Thank you very much. I know it was a lot, but I'll try to pack in 15 minutes. I have a philosophy background, so I think maybe I went a bit too far there. But if you have any questions, let me know.
Thank you, Achilleas.
Thank you.
Achilleas didn't see the stopwatch actually, but he perfectly timed it at 15 minutes. So very impressive.
Wow. Very cool.
Yeah. Is there any questions from the audience? We can open this up for like 5 minutes. A little bit of a conversation. Let's make this interactive. There's the first one already.
Sorry, to speak without a mic from here?
Sorry, wait, actually, I'll walk around with the mic. I think that's better.
Hi, my name is Sibeli. Thanks for your talk. Lots of interesting things there, especially halfway to the end. But there's something that always gets my mind whenever I'm seeing any conversations in this space where we're having art, fine art, decorative art, upholstered on a digital canvas stretcher or digital plinth, which is the
He agrees.
She's not really quiet. Hey, you just saw a dog, be quiet. It's like, why not start with a differentiation between art and fine art in these discussions as well? And this is not a hierarchical thing. It doesn't make one lesser than the other. But I think it's just as important and very helpful, even for the scene itself and for the, say, the 1% corner of the scene, I'm saying, with art, which is the fine art corner, like people that are working with context, discourse, fine art, like, and people that come from trad art, but have been operating as not trad art, like such as myself, for example, in trad art, and in the blockchain space, and embedment into social media, social sculptures, and stuff, etc. So, yeah, just a thought and a commentary, and I want to hear from what you think about this commentary. How do you see the importance of these distinctions, especially when you think about collective horizontal role modeling, mutual education, so that this whole thing can go forward? Because I truly believe in blockchain, not just for what we have been doing so far, but for mutual organization of artists for artistic autonomy, and even for the traditional art world, if they want to adopt this for COAs, it's perfect, on-chain. So, thoughts, please. Thank you.
I agree with you. I mean, what I was trying to say was basically, I think we've tried to shoehorn anything that's artistic arbitrarily onto like the ER721 token, right? It's like, well, used as a stretcher, put things there, and that's it. That's art now. Like, it's an object, you can move it around. What I'm saying is there's like a variety of different things you can do with this sort of programs and this sort of like protocols that I think if we were to take them more seriously and sort of interact with them, the distinction would emerge more naturally in a way, right? Because you have like a wider palette of art supplies that you can use. And at that point, like, what's fine art, like what is art, etc. This kind of like categorization can become a bit more interesting, because right now it's like everyone's pointing at one instantiation of it and saying this is the sort of the whole extent.
Cool. There's one more question back there. Coming, if I can make it. Can you?
Thank you. Great presentation, and I hope I understood 30%. So I hope what I'm going to say is from the 30% I understood. So two challenges that So one is, I love the idea of creating art as a community and bringing meaning through this kind of tribe meaning. But I think art flourishes more when it's kind of like the Berlin Bears, when you give artists 100 bears that are the same, when you create a framework that is the same for everyone and now go, and not telling the first one, now you design, and then the second one, need now to design it according to you. So I'm not sure, or it would be an interesting experiment, if an art should be a chain, or an art should be much more of a frame created by framework that allows everyone, that kind of like fork as a meaning creator, and not as a separator. And the second thing is, it's going to be funny, I guess, utility. So I guess all of this is based on the idea that there's a stage that is Christianity and churches, and then you can create art there because people are going to come and watch. Here, it seems that in order to be a part of that, you need to very much be a creator that participates, and it seems that it's one at a time, rather than everyone, that the ritual is actually not just to write, but actually much more of the read. You participate by being a part of, by criticizing, by conveying different feelings. And so just two challenges to think about that are much more from the art world.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Thank you. On the first point, I think you can actually architect this as like a sort of, you can have a framework of different, like an Artchain template, and you can, so that's one way of doing this, right? You can tell everyone, here's a framework, how do you like sort of amend it? So I think that's actually a very interesting way rather than starting from scratch. On the second point, if you think of this like, so the artist deploys this program, right? And then anyone can go and write on the program. They can affect it in some way. That's kind of the point here, is that like, think of the creativity as being sort of a dual process. The artist deploys a chain and then lets it go. And then me and you and everyone, under some rule set that the artist has defined, we can go and interact and affect it and alter it in some way, because the state updates. So that's the idea here. The idea is opening it up to a communal sort of process. You can have a range of permissions for that. Maybe the artist doesn't want it to be affected by other people. Maybe he wants to be affected by like 5 people. Or maybe it can be like super permissionless. All of these sort of, you have an option from a spectrum of choices, but fundamentally it allows for a granular, sort of permission setting by the artist as to what exactly should happen on this digital space that they created. And I think, like sort of with the things that we're working with so far, there's like a wide variety of different ideas of how that would work, including some of them which are like, no one can affect it, or like everyone can affect it, like anything between that.
Cool. Is there one quick last question in the audience? A quick one.
Thanks, Norman. You mentioned you have a philosophy background at Achilleas. What were the other, you referenced Walter Benjamin, what were the other philosophers who influenced your thought in this presentation?
I don't know. Adorno, I guess. But that's kind of it. Like it's really sloppy in some ways. I just kind of like copy pasted stuff and like pretended that I understood it, which I didn't either. But it is like, sort of like, Frankfurt School stuff. There's like some interesting things there, for sure. And then some, later, like Volheim's aesthetics of like, where is the artwork? Is it here? Is it there? It's nowhere. Is the whole book? So, yeah, some aesthetic stuff.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Achilleas.
Thank you.